No,
I'm listening to
actually,
my hand. I'm looking
we,
at my
we,
hands. I don't
we
know.
we actually don't get a countdown here,
Oh,
unfortunately. So I'm sure the people will be joining us momentarily. So I'm gonna
hopefully.
wait a little bit because I do want to actually,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going. Not only that, Martin, but like I said, I did find when we had our private chat a few weeks ago, when we were testing your audio and
Mhm.
video, I had said that it seemed to me that my recollection was that the point at which you seemed to, I pushed that brick out of that worldview. The conversation that we had, where your worldview was very clearly, you and I had been debating political ideals for a couple of years, actually, gun control and conservative versus liberal, etc.
Yeah.
And to me, the conversation that I recall was really what pushed that brick out of that worldview and got you going, oh, wait a minute, this sucks because I believe this stuff wholeheartedly. Was the one about a history of the United States.
Yeah. I can keep
And,
getting this wrong.
well, right, you said that it was
Right.
actually
Yeah.
the Steve Bannon thing, but
Right.
what I did find the conversation that we were having on that on my Facebook page, and I wanted to share it because again, there are some moments in there. You went when I said something like it was largely refuted by historians and even it's not highly cited. It's missing footnotes. Standard academic
Story.
profiling and such. You were like, you were taken aback by it.
Hmm.
So that was by Howard Zinn. I just wanted to bring it up here, not as a matter of. I hope you don't. I hope this is
Oh,
okay with you too.
oh, that's fine.
Okay, cool. So because it really was actually my primary post was something that I kind of rewrote and reposted a few weeks ago on Thanksgiving about
I saw that. Yeah.
the narrative that that 90 million people were wiped out by a handful of Europeans on small boats. So I don't know how we got into it. It's right here. Okay, yeah, you said you would have to research this. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on the screen here. And then I would really love for you to tell your story, as far as especially what it was. I remember our Steve Bannon conversation, but this to me was something I do remember very clearly. I'm going to share the screen if I can remember how. There we go. Is it big enough? Can you read it?
Not for me.
Oh, okay. That's okay. I'll just
I'm
blow
not
it up
sure.
to.
Yeah.
I'll just blow it up to full screen. Can you read that?
Let's see. Do I have a? Oh, there we go. All right.
So essentially, you had I said a book called A People's History of the United States. It was supposed to be
Hmm.
America. It was pawned off as a textbook on the subject. It was badly researched and highly criticized by the academic community. And you said you had totally read that book, and I said, well, it's almost pure fiction. You said you would have to research it, so I gave you a place to go. And essentially, again, I have to say that Zinn is a respected historian. My biggest problem with it, as this Stanford article pointed out, was that he took real history and then blended it with fiction to give perspective. And if he had published it as rather than saying a history of the United States, as a historian, which he is, so this is what people expected on the other end of it, if he had been honest enough to say that he had interjected some fictional characters and conversations to provide a perspective that could have been provided by, say, we talk about how great the founding fathers were. Well, maybe the Native Americans didn't think so much of them. So he created their narrative. This is the way they saw it. This is the way that
Well, that's what
Japan.
yeah, that's what he says. His intention is to write the story of history from the perspective of the people that were negatively affected by that history.
That's right.
That's what
And
his goal was.
and which I really actually appreciated. And when I read it, I was like, "Hey, this is really cool." And you actually had said here, you actually quoted some from that Stanford article, where you were saying that Weinberg acknowledges that Zinn's book was an important contribution when first published. While the standard of textbooks at the time presented a certainly about one view of the nation's history, far from manifest destiny, or from manifest destiny to the United States' moral superiority in the Cold War, Zinn put forward largely overlooked alternative perspectives, such as how slaves viewed the Constitution and how Cherokees felt about President Andrew Jackson. Zinn weaved a seamless, unified theory of oppression in which the rich and powerful afflict the poor and disenfranchised. Which, again, I can appreciate that as here's a book on perspective. It was picked up, and millions of copies were sold as a textbook to high schools and colleges all over the country. And so let me ask you this. When you read it, did you read it as a textbook, as a history book?
Yeah, I did, and the thing that you got to understand about I was told to read this at a time that I was just becoming politically in my early 30s. It's the first time I had become politically motivated. I believe it was during the Bush years, and my hatred to Bush and the war and all that kind of fired me up. And I was given this book as a must-read by, I was in Berkeley Open at the time. And I did. I read it as actual fact. And, coming from the liberal background that I have, it was like a warm blanket of liberal. It's like it triggered all of the things that I wanted to believe about how fucked up we are and how America is not has a good history. And we have no sort of moral standing to come across as a beacon of what we should aspire to be, that we're fucked up. And it would continue to be fucked up, and so that's what that book did for me. Is it reinforced those things that I had?
Well, and to be completely fair, I think this is where education fails us in general. Is that I too grew up with the God bless America, manifest destiny, and all that great stuff, as well as American exceptionalism, and these were the arguments, rather than any sort of balanced point of view on history. As I got older and I studied history, first as a passion, then as an academic discipline, I realized that how are you going to explain what it is, the brutality, not only that was foisted upon the people that lived here before Europeans came across on their little boats, but to those peoples themselves that were engaged in warfare, murder, slavery, they're human, indigenous people, if you want to call them that, Native Americans, if you want to call them that, are human too. Humans are violent. Humans are tribal, and so as I began to study this, I'm going, man, how do you explain that to a third grader? How do we find a way to tell a third grader that these are the great things that America is? Here is some of the ugliness that goes along with pretty much any civilization. And so this is one of the reasons I appreciated his book. But as from the academic point of view,
but as you pointed out, quite a lot of it is fiction. I mean,
right.
It really is. But so what do you think his motivation was in writing this, what he did? He must have known that he was...
He clearly did.
Know what he was doing, yeah. So do you think his idea was to push some sort of liberal agenda? Was it to corrupt the minds of as many people as you think it did?
I doubt it. I think what it was what I was just saying, is that he wanted to say, look, there's three sides to every story. Mm-hmm. This is what we have been taught is almost, it's like canon to believe that, that believe in manifest destiny and American exceptionalism, right, without qualifying what those things are. Personally, I do think there are things that America is exceptional at. You know what I mean? But I don't think, but to say American exceptionalism is a blanket one thing that encompasses all is kind of the way it was presented to me when I was growing up. I know we're not too different in age. What about you? Is that the way you were taught as well?
I'm an annoying analogy person. I have to have analogies. It's to the point where it's like, oh my God, can't you just tell it now? But, as growing up, I had a lot of things that I didn't like about my parents. And then when I got as old as they did or older, I began to realize, they were just doing the best they could. There was stuff that I didn't know about. And I feel the same way about what I now see our country. Now that I have more of a balanced view of it, I see that if you go back into history and place what was happening in that time, it's not that bad. It makes sense. And I think that we tend not to do that as much. We like to look at those things that happened in the past and try to apply them to today's morality. I think I totally changed the subject. Sorry.
No, 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 no. That's actually a very valid point. It's one of my biggest complaints is that it's really easy to look at any history through the lens of presentism.
Yeah, look
And
at
this,
your own history. Your
well,
own
and
human history. Yeah.
well, and see that this
Yeah.
that's a terrific point. It's one of the ways that I relate the way I see history, and that is that have you not evolved as a human being? I certainly have. You know, and without the ugliness of my of those previous skins that I wore during my life, could I have possibly gotten any better? You know, without acknowledging those things. First of all, you have to acknowledge them. So for us to say that, you know, America the Beautiful, everything's great about it, it's intellectually dishonest at best. But to then reevaluate, to evaluate our history based on one side of it is just as dishonest. So again, the question for me was, how do we teach that to people then when they're in the third grade, the fifth grade? Do we want to talk about what slavery was really like, you know, to a fifth grader? That can be very traumatic and difficult. So
Yeah.
that
I have a lot of faith in kids' ability to be able to handle that kind of stuff.
well,
I do.
I think these days, yes, I think perhaps coming out of the 50s where there was so much ugliness in the previous decade, you know what I mean? That
Yeah, but think about what it was like to be a 5-year-old in the late 1800s. I mean, street urchins running, you know.
you're preaching to the choir on that.
Yeah.
This is why, you know, it wasn't a big deal to get married at 15, and you know, because you'd seen so much ugliness at that point. You know, there was, not to mention your average life expectancy in the 19th century was about 45 years. You know what I mean? So again, to reevaluate these things by going, well, I can stand on the moral high ground that all those years that came before me created for me to stand on is really difficult. And it's like tearing down Columbus. You know, yes, he did the same ugly things that pretty much, first of all, one of the greatest things that we have in this country, and one of the greatest things about Western culture in general, is that we are a product of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a rejection of church being the ultimate power, you know, being the radio that spoke directly to God. And so all of the edicts, all of the ways that we were supposed to live, the way we were supposed to farm, what we were supposed to eat, who we were supposed to marry, what we were supposed to believe, and right down to the kind of ways that we would engage foreign peoples during conquest were dictated by the church. You know, so Columbus, being a Christian in the 16th century, was told, this is what God wants you to do. You did not question that. If you questioned it, the church also would put you to death or brand your feet or hang you up by your toenails, or you know what I mean? So you did these things. This was the culture you were born into, and you believed it was true. These days we have the luxury, because of the Enlightenment created by those periods of conquest and domination by the church, we have the luxury of going, wait a minute, I don't believe any of that. You know, without actually fearing retribution from some sort of grand power. So when we look back and go, oh, Columbus, we shouldn't name any days after him, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, wait a minute. You know, first of all, no, he didn't discover the country. But you know, discover this, that's kind of a weird story in and of itself. But the point being, without meandering too much from the original point, is that a perspective that I just gave. I gave the perspective. Where was he born? What was the world like that he lived in? The things that he did were built upon the foundations that he was born into. And people say, well, you're using that as an excuse. I'm going, no, I'm not, because no excuse is necessary. There isn't any excusing it based on the way we see these things in the 21st century. You know, if you asked me in the 16th century, they would have been an edict from God.
And as you were talking, something came up to me that
Yeah.
I kind of thought in perspective is that one of the problems we deal with is, you said, like, how do we teach these things to these children? It's one thing that personally in my life, if I'm being told a story from somebody and I'm not getting the complete picture, then that leads me into a place of distrust. And I also fill in those blanks with things that sometimes are a lot worse than what the truth is.
Fair point.
And I think that we, like you said, we have been, you know, when I got to that point where I went, oh, the stuff that they taught me in 5th grade and 6th grade is not true. There's a lot, they left a lot of stuff out there. So what else did they leave out? And that kind of caused me to go from what I knew to be true about American, and what we did and how we did things, to going to the Howard Zinn side, going all the way to horrible when the truth was always right in the middle. And I think that's one of the problems that we have with teaching kids or teaching any side of stories. It needs to be more complete. If it's not complete, then you leave yourself open for distrust and people to make up wild stories.
Well, let's also think about this too: is that our modern school system is really a product of it was designed by the military. Now, this is why you have odd schedules. There are bells. When bells ring, you change shifts, you change activities. You do these things based on bells. This was all very regimented, and the U.S. military kind of put together what we know to be the school system. Throughout the late 1930s into the 1940s during World War II, government propaganda was created in order to provide support to the war effort. We're going to send 30% of our young men overseas potentially to die for causes that
World War One or two? Which where were we at?
two.
Two. Okay.
One we actually jumped into a year before it was over, and did so as more of a pressured reaction to the fact that we were going to lose billions of dollars because Germany owed it to us, and we wanted to make sure we collected, which we did. I mean, that's, I'm oversimplifying it, but that was one of the things that was called for. But in order to make sure that there wasn't, I mean, we had just come through the stock market crash. We had a 25% employment rate based on the numbers that were available at the time, and they didn't even begin to decline until the war efforts began. They kind of fell to about 15%. And that's the best that we were able to do, and I don't want to get into I don't want to make it sound like I'm blaming FDR or something. I'm not. The point being is that in order to get support for all of that, government created propaganda is stuff that we see to this day. Those beautifully crafted posters that have Rosie the Riveter on them and Uncle Sam and that stuff.
The whole coordinating with the NFL that the military did. Just an example of incredible propaganda.
That's actually, yeah. It took me a second to put that together, but you're absolutely right. Because it does.
It's advertisement, not propaganda.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, propaganda is essentially, any sort of art that's designed to provide support to a political ideal. So, I mean, propaganda sounds like an ugly word. It can be and it can't be. But in any case, let me move forward with my point. And that I think some of what it is that was taught in schools in the 50s, in the late 40s too, like my parents, your parents, through the 60s and even into the 70s and 80s, was kind of the result of that propaganda. God bless America, that united message. We pledge allegiance to the flag. In God we trust.
First it was like this. then they went, oh.
That's right. Actually, it was. Well, that's.
It's not good anymore.
Well, do you know where that? I mean, this is actually
Francis Bellamy, the big socialist. Yeah.
That's right. So, well, also, I mean, even the salute came from medieval times when knights would, when they would pass each other as a sign of respect, would flip up their visors. So that's where that came from. Mm-hmm. So, and it actually morphed into this, and then it morphed into this. It's it's kind of funny when you look at. Everything has a history, right? Mm-hmm. So what I'm thinking is that what we were taught in school about, the greatness of America wasn't necessarily done. Like you asked me, let's circle back around. You asked me if I thought Zinn wrote that book as a matter of to try and push liberal agenda or anything like that. I can't say that he did or didn't, but I doubt it. I think he genuinely wanted to say, to push back against that. That propaganda was being provided to us in elementary school. Uh-huh. And I don't want, I can hear it now. People are going to read this as some sort of anti-American rant, and it's not. I love this country, and I love the foundational principles upon which it was built and is still trying to deliver on. That's the thing. They created... Yeah, go ahead.
I can love something and love it completely with all of its nasty parts.
Warts and all.
I don't need to have some sort of idealistic version of something to go, hey, this is fucked up, but this is mine. And we've done some incredibly great things. Yeah, made some mistakes, but everybody does.
Well, I think a great example is, there's a lot of ways to give examples of this, and I think I'm going to use one that's actually quite current. Have you seen that there are protests and riots in Denmark because the Danish government has provided authority to force vaccinations for COVID upon the Danes and use police force in order to administer them. In other words, they will hold you down, strap you in a chair, whatever that actually means in terms of mechanics, was authorized. Well, a lot of Danes are going, you're not doing that to me. I mean, I'll show up and sign up for it, but you're not going to force it. You won't force it on my child. And the Danish government is going, yeah, we will. So that's what I'm saying is that at least at present, this is one of those things that in this country you can't get away with. You can't get away with that. You know what I mean? That is something that our foundational, the mooring that our laws have to this foundational documents, that's something that we should still say is very different from any other country in the world.
Well, and if you ask the people to do the right thing and you sell them the right thing, you don't need to force them.
This is something I agree with that. That's interesting. Yeah. Now let's talk about. I'm going to kind of shift it back to you here in that you are a professional restaurant management. You're a restaurant management professional, which I can tell right now is not a job I envy. I mean, I know that you probably earn pretty good cash, but at the same time, I'm not sure I'd want the kind of cash you earn for what you got to do. So respect to that. I would imagine so.
If you don't, it's not worth it.
So that being the case, how do you see what is going on? I'm sure. Have you seen the video of the woman whose outdoor restaurant? She owned a restaurant, put $50,000-$60,000 into building an outdoor dining area that was within compliance, and then they told her she has to shut it down. And at the same time, in the same parking lot, the movie industry is building an outdoor dining area, and she is
people catered lunch. 200 people at a catered lunch. Yeah.
So my question is, how do you feel about that? Break that down. What does that look like for you?
Well, what we feel like in the restaurant business, and I think it's fair, is that all of us want to do the right thing the right way, and we followed every new guideline that was given to us. 6 feet, 50%. I've got everybody wearing masks. I got everybody wearing gloves. I got stations set up everywhere for hand sanitizers. I'm wiping off people's pens. We are doing all these things that we're supposed to do, and spent a lot of money to do it, and then they just still offend us and say, we can't make any money. And it's really frustrating. It feels like we're kind of being isolated out. And but I gotta say, I mean, I understand that when you have people, the whole thing is the amount of time you spend with somebody. If you're over 15 minutes with somebody without a mask on and somebody's positive, most likely it's going to spread. And so that happens in the restaurants where people come and they sit down, they take their masks off to eat and they're with each other for more than 15 minutes. So I understand that. But at the same time, it's just a kick in the teeth when you don't see it applied evenly.
Well, and we also, from what I've heard now, again, to be fair, and I always add this disclaimer if I haven't done my own work on it, and I haven't. Mm-hmm. But the current narrative is that the quote, the science, which you know how much I hate that term, as if it's some static thing. Here's the science. I have it here you go. It's in my pocket.
Suppose science, Christian. Come on.
The science, no. I trust the process that it is, absolutely. And the process does not yield static results. So they say, from what I understand, the narrative from pretty much any news media outlet that I've seen it on, is that there is no real reason to shut down outdoor dining areas if they're designed right.
The whole outdoor thing kills me anyhow, because it's not outdoors. They've taken the indoors and they've put it outdoors and then covered it up and made it the indoors. So it's not even outdoors. It's
part of that design is airflow, which is really, it seems to be, that's what the quote, the science says is the issue.
Yeah, right. But it's indoors. You just move the indoors outdoors and put a tent around it. So I don't understand the indoor outdoor thing anyhow. This should just, if we limit it to 4 people at a table, give me 50% of my capacity. I'm going to keep everybody 6 feet away, and we won't be super spreading. and we can all and at 50%, I can stay in business, and I can have 60 to 70% of my crew stay on at 50%. So I can actually have over 50%. When I'm at 50% capacity, my sales are not at 50%. I'm still over. I was at 70% of what I was doing last year at 50% capacity because
So
you're just not.
that's enough not only to keep you open, but that's
Yeah,
actually you're still making a 2% margin rather than the standard 4, right?
we handed out 2 months of bonuses, so we were doing okay
You
when we
must
were
have
at
been.
50%. Yeah, we were doing okay. So it was really hard to have that all kind of shut down. And for us, we're in Washington, so I'm up here in Seattle. I got Inslee. And the thing that we don't know right now is that next Monday supposedly is when that's how long it was supposed to go to December 14th. We haven't heard a thing. We don't know when he's going to announce. I have schedules to write. I have food to buy. I've got all these things that I need to do to open up again, and he's not telling us even what numbers he's looking at, or when he's going to make that decision, or how he's going to tell us. We don't fucking know a thing. So that's super frustrating too. If we at least knew how to plan, and I think he's waiting to find out if Washington gets its act together and send us some help. That'll make him feel better about keeping us shut down until after Christmas.
Well, it's another interesting way to segue. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
I
go
didn't.
ahead. There you go. I
I
set that
well,
up for you.
thank you. I didn't get the research together in time, so I'm probably going to have to save it
Oh,
for a different night.
darn
But
it.
what I saw yesterday, though, was fairly disturbing, in that the $3.5 trillion stimulus. A bunch of us got a one-time $1,200 check, and then the Federal Reserve guaranteed the banks $1 trillion a day. That's what they gave the banks per day in guarantees. So again, it's funny to me because it seems to me that the money is again flowing up, straight out of the Congress that for whatever reason people still trust, provided that it isn't the other guy, whichever religion you've
Whoever's in
decided you
charge.
ascribe
Yeah.
to, so let's say your religion is the left or Democrat religion, yours is the Church of Pelosi, then you blame the Church of McConnell. If yours is the Church of McConnell, then you blame the Church of Pelosi. I'm looking at them both going, how come it is you can't see that both groups here actually are required in order to screw you? Both of these groups have to sign up. In fact, Pelosi, for example, this one I love. I don't know if you remember, but the Church of Pelosi, they dug their heels in the beginning of October, November on the second round of stimulus. Because I personally would say that if I was a church strategist, that it would have been simply to make Trump look bad going into this election with no stimulus, right? Because, hey, we got 2 more years before Pelosi's job's on the chopping block, or at least not Pelosi's job, but the Senate's job. So that being said, if and that's pure speculation, I want to make sure everybody understands. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm saying that if I were to guess a little bit, and now that now they came out with a new deal a couple of days ago on the second round of stimulus. It's half of what it was when she refused to sign it, but otherwise everything's pretty much the same. It's just half the amount. So what I'm saying here is that the way it looks to me is that these private business folks, and I'm one. I own a business. Everybody I do business with is a private business owner. I don't have any corporate contracts. I'm not really interested in them. I decided to keep my business the size as it is because I like doing business with my neighbors and the people of my community. I decided that 20 years ago. I know it sounds awfully lofty and altruistic, but it's true. That's really the choice that I made. To watch people suffer while these people play politics, and then the Federal Reserve guarantees $1 trillion a day to these banks. And again, I'm qualifying by saying that's off the top of my head. I did that bit of research, but I don't have it in front of me, so I could be wrong. I will adjust that if I'm incorrect. That says to me again that whoever it is that we're voting for, whoever it is that we're fighting over, whichever one of these churches that we ascribe to, really don't. They're actually engaged in a tug of war with themselves, not with us.
I just read a book, and I dropped this on you any warning. I read a book. It's called The Infinite Game. Have you ever heard of this game?
No, no, sir.
Well, it's basically a book for running a business, sort of management strategy, sort of how you want to play the game to be in it. In a nutshell, It says that you either play finite games as a business, or as a group, or as an organization, or you play infinite games. The difference is a finite game is sort of a one loss, it's sort of that zero sum thing where you're just trying to win at all costs. They liken it to
Congress.
arbitrary putting up. Yeah, no. Actually, I'm going to say that Congress is playing an infinite game. Finite game would be that you have this arbitrary bonus number that you put out, and so you cut labor down to nothing so that you can all make your bonuses in this quarter because they put this quarterly number out, and that's not a long-term solution. So the infinite game is to keep the game going. It's not to win or lose necessarily, but to keep playing the game as long as you fucking can. And that is what the Republicans and the Democrats are doing. They might look like they're fighting really
Interesting.
hard.
Very interesting.
But as long as they both know they're going to the Super Bowl every 4 years, they're quite happy to keep this game going as long as possible. It's only if they were to play it in a way that one actually won, destroy the other one, then the game would be over and you'd have new players coming in.
Well, that's actually, and I'm inclined to believe that completely too, because it seems like that is the long game, because everything we see in the short term is just really, it's a patch to prop up that idea rather than anything truly effective.
Did you see Lindsey Graham on the floor of the Senate give that fist bump to Kamala Harris?
Yes.
Did you see that? That's all
I did.
That was it right there. They're cool. They're good.
You know what's funny? I wanted to mention
stage and everything like that, but on the floor it's like, yeah, what's up?
Well, and did you see how Twitter reacted to it? And Twitter is, to me, it's, they're twits. I actually really love using that term because that's what they are.
You should not know what everybody's thinking all the time. That's not a great thing.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
It's interesting because I think it gives us some real insight into when people feel safe, the kind of shitty things that they'll say. I have to wonder how many of them truly believe what they're saying too, or if it's just simply a.
Yeah, well, I have a personal. It's like I have to be nice to people all day at work. Like sometimes when they're being really, really, really mean to me, I have to be nice to them. So after work, I like to come on the internet and be a total asshead and just be really fair to people because it's like I'm getting. It's very cathartic for me. So I think everybody has this sort of keyboard personality that they have that's separate from who they really are. They not talk to anybody face to face the way I do on the internet.
Well, and that's why I said, the security, it gives them a place of security. It's funny because they use their real name and their real face very often, and they'll still say really crappy things which is one of my favorite techniques in dealing with people is to simply lean and go, wow, that's fascinating. I'm not sure why you would say that kind of thing about me, but if
I'm truly confused, as you say.
I am genuinely confused, and it's funny because it almost sounds like I say that as a line, and I don't. I'm generally confused because one of the foundations, again, let's circle back around to Enlightenment thinking, Western culture thinking, is based on a foundational principle that people generally act in. You can take them in good faith. They generally have good intentions. So we have to start with that. Even as a skeptic, I think people act with good intentions. You know what I mean? So
to be reciprocal.
Well,
they do it. Yeah, they want. It's more important. It's not who you are, but it's how you're thought of. Your reputation is extremely important.
Well, that's definitely true. That's definitely true, but it's also the foundation of our idea that came largely from British common law, that you are innocent until proven guilty. You don't have to prove your innocence. That's not how that works. Right. Instead, we assume the presumption of innocence is the same, is based on this idea of the presumption that your intentions are good.
Okay,
so you see what I'm saying? So that being the case, when I say, well, look, I'm genuinely confused by this, is that I'm wondering if somebody is really that nasty in there, or if they're, this is just a part they play because they, like you said, they had a crap day. They want to be an ass helmet to somebody. They say shitty things because they also don't like the idea of having their arguments picked apart, which I can also understand. If somebody had the courage to say, look, I understand where you're going with this, and frankly, I'm going to be honest with you right now, no matter how good your argument is, fuck you. I'd be like, okay, I respect that. I would totally respect somebody doing that to me. Instead, they want to dance around it, and after I have taken the argument apart down to, and I don't say that as some sort of ego thing. It's more like, let's disassemble this argument and find out where it lives. And so,
let me tell you who you were to me and how it happened. How it
okay,
went down at the very beginning.
yeah, let's
Because-
talk about that. Yeah,
So when we first beginning to engage, now I'm a diehard liberal. I believe the whole thing. I'm fully bought into it. Every single part of it.
yeah. So, some background for everybody here. Martin actually came to the middle from from a pretty far. You weren't progressive left, but far enough liberal left.
Yes, yeah, I was fully liberal left. I bought in, and I was very much partisan. I was extremely into the partisan crowd. I argued for the liberals and Democrats. I defended all of them without question, and everybody on the right is evil and bad. And so
Evil.
I had, yeah, they were evil and they were racist, and I thought of that. So we began interacting with you, and the thing that I did, I recognized is that, okay, this guy's fucking smart. I don't like him, but he's smart. And
A lot of people say that.
really impressed with the woman that you're dating, and I was really impressed with your guitar.
Can you hear what he
playing.
just said?
Yeah.
I'm really impressed with the woman that you were dating. She's standing right here.
So
Thank
I figured
you.
he can't be all that bad. But what I couldn't figure out is how not to put you into the category of right-wing Republican. I couldn't figure out how to move you out of that section. So I continually argued with you in that vein. I needed to make you a right-wing nut.
Gotcha.
And I needed to argue my liberal side against you. But you kept coming at me with the same type of arguments over and over again until I finally, the one time the Steve Bannon thing where I said, well, clearly he's a racist. And you said, well, prove it. And I said, okay, I'm going to go fucking prove it. This has to be easy. This has got to be really easy. And it was
Essentially,
fucking-
just to be clear, everybody, I just didn't say prove it. I said, well, if you're going to make a statement like that, and I remember this, I said that is a very bold thing to call somebody. So if I were you, I'd want to be able to present a solid argument as to why I'm branding somebody this terrible thing. I think that's I'm kind of
Correct.
encapsulating it, but that was it, right? Okay,
Well, basically,
please continue.
You challenged me to go do some work rather than just tell me I'm wrong. You didn't just say, hey, you're wrong. You're an idiot. You said, go, let's. And so I thought, well, this is going to be super easy. And I went out and I scoured the internet for his own words. I learned enough about this point that I couldn't just send you a link to an article that said he was racist, like some people do here. I won't mention any names, Chris. So I knew that I had to find something that was in his words,
Yeah.
to really kind of back it up. It couldn't just be, because I started to learn, you started to teach me how to read through the articles and read where they put the quotation marks here and then fill in their own words and then more quotation marks. And they just like put these two comments together with words in the middle. And I'm like, so anyhow, I couldn't find anything. I found a lot about him being a nationalist. That was where I started to learn what they were really about, and that's when I started to realize. That's when I saw the machine. That's when I saw the machine that was out there. That you would get this one statement about something, and it would just be repeated throughout the media ad nauseum without anything to fucking back it up. And that's when I was like, holy shit, I got to rebuild everything now because it could potentially all be bogus. And that was very disrupting for me, but that's how I ended up being changed, and that's how you affected me.
And I'm always and it's funny because I got an ego on me. I'm truly humbled when you say that. I have been since day one. And I can tell you this: I'm asked very often if there's any real productivity from the debates that I engage in, and I say, well, yes. Because if I can change one person's mind about one thing, just based on anything I might have said, then that's important. That's an important thing. Because people have done that for me to the point where, like, for example, I think David Peters has just come in. I use him as an example all the time.
Hey,
David. you know David.
Oh, yeah.
I know you do.
Friends one time, yeah.
Well, and as I have pointed out
Hopefully
many
someday we'll
times
get
to
it
you,
back.
that you should probably figure that one out.
Yeah.
I have a great deal of respect for this guy, and
Smart.
he very man. The dude isn't.
Yeah.
He's no joke. You don't. And it's funny because generally what I see him doing is just like his little master trolling thing that he does. I can't wait to get him. He actually said that he might come and talk to me on here, and I do believe we'll have a fascinating conversation. I have no doubt.
I'll have to watch that one.
I doubt that I'll get his, the little master trolling thing that he does. In any case, so from there you found and see, and David is actually throwing back that again, and David loves to take little snippets of things and cherry pick them as like an argument. So that is something that he does. We're going to break him of that habit. So you weren't able to find anything that directly made Bannon to you, at least the way you would define
Not
it
even
as a
close.
racist.
Not
Did
even
you?
close.
I shared with you the audio where he addressed the Council of Bishops at the Vatican, right?
Maybe. I think
That I'm pretty sure I did because my dad was of the same belief as you, and I said, why don't you just listen? I'm not, as you probably know by now, I don't use other things to make my arguments for me. If I don't understand them, I flat out tell you, look, I can't argue that because I don't know it. So, but this was one of those times where I'd share this because I wanted people to hear in his own words. And I'll be honest with you, I'm really neither a fan nor a detractor of Bannon. I can tell you that I don't like what he does for work. He's a propagandist. He's a master propagandist, probably one of the best since Goebbels. I don't want to compare him. I'm just saying it in terms of how brilliant and how well crafted his propaganda is. It's like that, it's at that level. It could either be taken as really evil or really genius, one way or the other. So I don't like that because what he's designed to do, what his design is to understand how people simply react and then feed them just what they need to get them to react his way. I hate that, and I don't care what side it comes from. That's something this is what Skeptic Tank is all about. I'm sick of that kind of shit. At the same time, when we listen in his own words, him addressing the Council of Bishops at the Vatican, he is clearly a philosopher and a brilliant one at that. His mind should never be underestimated. And during that time, he talked about the incredible inequity and inequality and unfairness that the church has shown minorities the world over. And I'm listening to this going, this is no argument from some sort of a racist white supremacist. He's taking the second most powerful organization on the planet to task in very clear and concise terms for the way that they have said, look, you are allowed in our embrace and you will get our help, but only if you convert from being whatever you are to to our way of thinking. Which is really kind of dramatic considering what he does for work. In any case, I recommend highly that any of you who haven't heard him, it's over an hour. But it's worth listening to him talk about how they have created the church, the power of the church, has created these incredible inequities and inequalities all over the world. It's pretty impressive. So,
And yeah, at the end of the day, I think what you kind of bring up is that there are legitimate things that you can go after Bannon for. Like, let's
yes.
have the real conversation on what he really stands for, and argue that instead of having this argument that just doesn't even, because it's not. You can just, you claim that he's a racist, we can't even argue because he's not. Or at least I can't see that he is. But if you want to talk about nationalism and whether you think that's a useful thing for our country, that's a debate we could have because he is a nationalist and he says so. I think we find in a lot of the political arguments that we have today and discussions, we're not even having the same conversations.
No.
One side's arguing this, the other side's arguing this, and
that's right. Well, and to that point, this is one of the reasons that I brought up the other night on the live stream. David was here participating a great deal. We had a number of people involved. And I said that he'd recommended a number of different things that I read. And out of respect for the idea that I'm trying to build a bridge between groups of people that don't generally talk to each other or understand each other, I read them. I bought what he recommended. I read them. And the whole idea is, it's like you just said, he is arguing from his point of view. I don't understand his point of view. How am I going to understand it? By listening rather than reacting to what he is saying. It's really important. This is the thing. We tend to latch on to triggers. And we're going to get right into the Jonathan Haidt conversation here in a minute because of it.
Serve it up.
Right. We'll add, and good. And I have some too. I have questions for you on this. But this is what I'm talking about is very clear. I think at this point it's quite clear to you is that we could use different words or the same words that mean two different things entirely to people that identify as left or identify as right or identify as whatever. Same word means two different things. And that is one of those difficult bridges to cross. So what I have discovered is if you don't use that word, people tend to stop being triggered by what you're saying and listen to it. I think a really good example, here's a number of things. Actually, Dustin and I were just talking about this today. If you were as a liberal to say to a conservative, it's about time the rich pay their fair share, do you think that conservative is going to go, wow, that's an interesting point?
No.
No, he's going to be triggered by the pay their fair share line. He's also going to take to task the, quote, rich. To me, the rich might mean something totally different than it means to you. But so I will never say pay their fair share. I will never. Those are words that I won't use because it makes people's ears stop. Here's another one. He who shall not be named, and I think some of you know who that is, would react to the term the deep state. And I realized, wait a minute, the deep state is something that the Fox News guys say, that's, so what is it, what is really the deep state? Well, it's the unelected and entrenched power in Washington that's there long after the people that we elect come and go that are still looking to hang on to their jobs. So what they do as a matter of keeping those jobs is manipulate the people that we have elected to their own ends.
That's a very skeptical look of what they do, but true, yes.
Well, there's many of them that do. And the thing that's funny about that is, again, before I even decided I was going to try and craft that narrative, I went, okay, can I find precedent for this? Well, I think here's a really great one. Are you aware of what the FBI did to Martin Luther King?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because these days, during the last 4 years, we kept hearing about how the FBI didn't do that to the president. They don't do that kind of. Yes, they do. They have a history of doing that kind of shit.
The FBI just kind of go along doing their thing, and the left and the right, depending on what's going on culturally, love them or hate them, depending on whether they feel like the FBI is on their side at given times.
And what's constant? The FBI.
Yeah.
And what's constant is the FBI. It's still there. Most of the guys are still there. The CIA, they're still there too. Clapper goes on TV and lies to us all about what he knows. He goes and tells the truth to Congress and nobody cares. It's really an amazing thing. That to me is the deep state. But if I use that term, the liberal ear wants to turn me off. Now I'm repeating something Hannity said or whatever, and I can't stand that fucking guy. So that being the case, this was part of your journey. I recommended to you a couple of years ago a book by Dr. Jonathan Haidt, who is a professor of moral psychology at New York State University. It's NYU, right? Yeah. And what struck me about him is that he and his team, which are based in, sociologists, psychologists, and evolutionary psychologists, which is a fascinating idea to me. There. Isn't that great?
It's the esophagus.
So I grabbed this book called The Righteous Mind, why good people have differences, political and religious differences. Yeah. And I recommended it to you, and I think you just kind of ate it up. This was like a life-changing event for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm easily life-changed.
Fair enough. But, that's not a bad thing, is it? No. Better information, you change your life, right? Yeah. And that came as a result of the awakening that you had as a liberal who would argue the Liberal Party line every time and going, wait a minute, I'm being lied to. In your revelations with Bannon and perhaps even the Howard Zinn thing, which you say wasn't really it, but it had to have been a part of it.
That was all part of it. I think it's funny because if you had asked me to remember it, I said by that time I'd already believed part of you, but then I was reading what you put in, and I'm like, I was still fighting at that point. So maybe it was more at the same time that I tend to misremember things.
Well, and I also have the recollection that you kind of disappeared and wouldn't talk to me for like 2 or 3 months. And then finally when you did...
I had to go woodshedding a little bit,
So
they ate me alive on stage. I had to go practice a little bit.
Martin and I, we used to debate all the time different stuff, and finally, whenever it was you had your revelation based on some information that I provided, I think I could take some credit for that anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
Or at least the way I think part of it also is the way I present my arguments. I don't stand on bad ideas ever. You know, it's really easy for me to go, wow, I was wrong about that. You know, that's man, that takes practice. But
Well, you're relentless and consistent.
Those are good things to be, I suppose.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, you had disappeared. You wouldn't talk to me for a couple of months. And then finally, I get this instant message from you, which again, I found it. It was in 2016, and you said, "Okay, man, my in-laws love you. My wife hates you," and that was like your message after not hearing from you for 2 months. And I said, "Oh, okay. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?" You said, "I'm not sure yet. I'll get back to you on that." So
it's still true to this day too. So
well, I'm sorry. I don't mean to make anybody hate me, but
Sure.
and then I after a while I recommended this book. So you took a lot from it. Why don't you talk to us about what it was that it meant to you and what it was that Hyde's premises are?
Well, so basically, and this is an analogy. I love analogies, and you can take it either way. Christian actually mentioned that I should kind of lay off on the analogy, but the first part of the book is he's sort of letting us know that there's two different things in which we drive ourselves, and you think about it as the heart, it's the mind, it's emotion, it's logic. For him, he came up with this analogy of an elephant and a rider. I forgot why he used an elephant.
Dr. Hyde. Dr. Hyde said that. Yeah.
So in his premise is that our emotional beings, our emotional reactions are where we go with things, and then our logical minds, which he calls the rider serves the elephant, not the other way around. So you might think of the elephant as being driven by the rider, but the rider's just narrating the story. So the emotion is the elephant. The elephant's telling us, what we believe in, how we're going to react to things, and then the writer describes the events. Basically, the logic follows the emotion. So that's the premise of what he states. And the reason why this really resonated with me is that in my business and my career, I've had to really understand nonverbal communication, both as a leader of people, of training people, of coaching and developing. And as a server, I became wickedly good at getting money from people and tips by making very good 40-minute relationships. So in 40 minutes, man, you're going to think that I'm the greatest person ever. And it doesn't matter who you are, I would adapt to that table. And so that, depending on that table, I figured out really quickly exactly what that table wanted and what did I need to do. And they made those decisions on me based on my nonverbal communications and how open I was with them. And then they immediately said, if they liked me in the first 10 seconds of me hitting that table, then the rest is going to be fine. I can screw up and forget shit, fuck the table all up, but they like me from the beginning and they're going to like me throughout the end. And the story that they tell about that experience is going to be based on their emotional response to me from the very beginning. So they like me that way. They remember the good stuff and they forget the bad. So I knew this to be true. I know that people choose things with their emotions. And what's fascinating to me also is that the limbic center, so the limbic system is where nonverbal communication is both interpreted and comes from. And the limbic system is an older system in the brain. It developed way before the frontal lobe, which is where our language center is. The limbic center is also where our emotions come from. So shocking. That's where both those things are developed in that same place. So when we are introduced to something, or when we hear something, immediately the limbic system fires out the information, and then our frontal lobe goes, time to explain this, time to figure it out. Yeah. So that also made complete sense to me.
Well, let me give you a slight pause here because the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe that is their function. What's really interesting is that Aristotle figured this out about 2,300 years ago. And he wrote of it in a series of books that he wrote on ethics. And one of the things that he said that he noticed is that it was completely unnatural for a human person to be able to take a piece of stone and make a beautiful piece of art out of it. He also noticed that it's totally unnatural for a human person to play the lute effectively. These are things that, we weren't designed to do, but we could learn to do them really well. He also recognized that our primal instinct being the limbic the system essentially, is to react to information. And whether that information is there's a meteor coming, it's going to thunderstorm, this guy's telling me he's going to kill the people in my tribe, whatever it is, we're out of food. Is that we are pre-wired by evolution to react. We react to things. And he thought that, wait a minute, am I effective when I'm reacting? No. I'm more effective when I allow that, you can't stop your primal self from that reaction. It's not possible. But it is possible to go, okay, I acknowledge that reaction. Now, what's really going on? That is the elephant and the rider. The elephant is that reaction, that emotional drive that takes you through life. And the rider is that logic that says I'm going to stop reacting to where the elephant's driving me and figure out what I think of it. I'm going to provide some logic and reason, apply logic and reason to it. He also, and to the point of being able to craft things with your hands and make great works because of art, he also understood that the only way to develop this into a skill was through the same kind of practice that the unnatural practice of carving stone into a beautiful piece of art or learning to play the lute well. It's that kind of practice that it would take to develop the discipline to stop reacting to information and begin considering information. So these things have some wonderful roots. And Hyde was able to take that, encapsulate it into some modern research, where he also was able to point it to a set of moral foundations, which his whole idea is called moral foundations theory. Yeah. 5 moral foundations that are basic. By the way, that 6th was a matter of I don't know if you're aware, it was a matter of submissions that he and his team took for several years. In any case, to wrap this up and give it back to you, the moral foundations are what he has been able to determine, and he is the pioneer. He really is the guy who has taken what everyone else has done before him and pioneer it into this, channel it into the idea that as humans are born, some of these 5 moral foundations are innate, which is really fascinating to me. Some people have said that's an argument for God and for intelligent design. I'm still trying to. Yeah, see, it makes you think for a second. You're like, ooh,
No, I think the way he described it was that it's predetermined. It's not predetermined, but it's a system that's set up for the experience. So it's like a chapter in a book. It's not written yet, but we all have that.
But you have the page.
Right, and society can't just write whatever story it wants. We have certain innate sections that they're to be filled in a little uniquely for each society, but they're basically the same. Yes, that is kind of
the other thing I was going to say, and I think this was also part of your point. So you said that you resonated with his work because you have already experienced this and observed it in your profession, in the training that you've received. It's like, oh, okay, this makes sense. He also said, but this is also where we find what the differences are between liberals, conservatives, left, right, center, is how many of these moral foundations or which ones that they consciously or unconsciously have attached themselves to.
Right. And I think to not bury the lead, I think one of the funniest aspects of the whole thing is that actually Republicans have way more or conservatives have a way larger trigger palette than
it's true. It's true. But at the same time, out of the 6 moral foundations, they have 6 of them, and liberals or progressives have 3.
Yeah, at one point he mentions that it's like tastes, and actually, so the liberals. So let's get into them a little bit real quick. We'll go over the 5 of them. We'll kind of discuss each one.
Yes, please.
So the very first one is the Care Harm Foundation, which
speak clearly. Care and harm. Care and harm.
Right. So it's on one side you have care. The way he puts these in is you have it's the care principle, and on the other side you have harm. So that's the opposite of the two. And so this is the main liberal foundation. Conservatives care about it, but not nearly as much. It's way more nuanced for them. The liberals see this, one of the classic examples is the baby seal being beaten to death. Like that's immediately going to trigger your care. Like this is awful, right? You don't want to know the story of why this baby seal that's adorable is being clubbed by this evil person. It's just that triggers you that's awful.
Yep.
It also works the way that they care about the earth, and global warming. That's why that works so well for the left, is that we're harming the earth, and it's our job, it's our moral job to care for things. And this comes from childbearing. It comes from the amount of investment that it takes.
Again, these ideas are instinctive. These are foundational, instinctive animal things that we do. And out of that care and harm is that idea that we do have to propagate the species. So we've got to protect those babies. We have to protect the earth because it feeds us. We have to protect. So yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure that that I gave a little perspective. That's all. Go ahead.
So for each one of these, he did say that he needed to find some sort of original trigger for it to make sense that this was innate. It had to be
yes.
some sort of, and then he tries to move it into with the modern AOs. But obviously, as we all know, that because children are born not even being able to, infants are born not with the inability, well, hell, our heads aren't even formed yet. There's going to be a lot of care, and not just like insects, have like 1,000 babies and hope they live and run off for the most part. Not only does it take the mother to stay around, but it takes more than just one person to raise a child. So where's the huge investment? So of course we have that as a moral foundation. So liberals care about police violence. One of the biggest ones today, right now, that triggers that care is that kids in cages. At the border. All you need to do is show a picture of a kid in a cage, liberal, and they're just going to be that's going to drive them crazy. They're not going to ask why or how did that child end up in that cage, and they need none of that. That's all the writer. The writer does that. The elephant, which we'll say your emotional mind, war, starving children, all these things. And the liberals don't. So that's where the liberals put most of their effort in, and you can see that in culture wars.
Well, I was just going to say, David's comment here, the Bible says that man has dominion over the earth and should be a good steward. I don't think that either conservatives or liberals would disagree on that. I think, however, that for conservatives, based on what you're talking about here, that the argument is nuanced. Well, what does being a good steward mean? How do we look at that? And what are the differences between the way David might interpret a good steward and the way a conservative might interpret what a good steward is? Those are the things that Haidt is talking about.
And there's nothing wrong with any of these moral theories. These are all positive, good things. I mean, we should care for things. We shouldn't harm things. There's nothing innately wrong about that. And me saying that liberals care more about it other than conservatives is not a judgment at all. This is just what we found to be true.
No, and I want to make sure that everybody understands that, because I brought that up as well. And I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure we have the correct disclaimers here, because people take things out of context on purpose. You know that. Is that I personally, I have said since the very first video I did on Skeptic Tank 2 years ago, I hate to break it to you liberals, I hate to break it to you conservatives, but we all need both of you. There is a balance that both provide, and we need them both.
We need mom and dad. It's mom liberal. The liberal ideas for the most part are traditional female types. I hope now I'm going to get in trouble, but they do tend to have the more mom type of thoughts. The conservative is much more dad, and to raise us, future generations, we need mom and dad to be getting along and working together and agreeing on, okay, dad, this is the best job for you. All right, mom, this is the right now they're drunk, wired on meth in the backyard fighting, and we are and trying to figure out how to live. So it's not good when they're not getting along, and they really are not getting along now.
Well, and the interesting thing is too, again, is that what I took away from Haidt's work and his book was this very thing, that it's like, first of all, I took away that we need each other. Nature has both of these bits in it to coexist. It's not like one, that nature went, wait a minute, I screwed up when I created this one. This one's better. It's not that. There is a balance in pretty much everything, and that includes the types of people that there are on this planet. There is a balance, and that balance is necessary. So and Destin's actually given you props for your analogy. Thank you. Well, it's funny because
you guys there. Thanks so much.
Mic drop. In this case, it would be a webcam drop. But the point being is that this is why I keep talking about making those bridges. Haidt, I did a video where I used a reference by Haidt in terms of our ongoing culture wars, and that it is very dangerous for us to take our fellow man, and because they have different ideas than we do, see things differently, that we need to turn them into enemies. Because then what we have is two groups that are now enemies, rather than people that, rather than saying, this is the way that he suggested the approach. He said this is what made Martin Luther King such a great unifier and a great speaker, is that rather than saying you all have done this to us, we are your victims and you will pay, which is what we see now. And I'm not just talking about from black Americans or white or anybody, really. I'm talking about that is like the milieu. This is how we communicate now, is through those extreme absolutes. Is that he said much more effectively, it would be to say, can we find some common ground where we agree that our brothers and sisters in this country have not had the same opportunities that some of us have? Can we agree on that much? If we can start there, then we found common ground, and we can there's some unity in that idea, rather than saying you are my enemy and I don't care what you have to say because you're evil. We've seen a lot of this. For example, 2 nights ago, I brought up the blacklists that are being made of, quote, Trump voters and of people who worked for Trump. And these are people that Robert Reich says we need to keep track of, and then we need to bring them before truth. Oh, yeah, have you seen this stuff? AOC was talking about it. This is an idea. And I kept going, man, you guys never studied history, did you? You can't seriously think this is a good idea. But to circle back around, I don't want to meander too much, is that...
Come back.
No, I'm back. I'm back. I'm just trying to frame it so I don't lose it. Is that the entirety of that argument is based on the idea that this president, this temporary egotistical dickhead of a president, was actually not just wrong or suffering from narcissistic personality disorder, but actually evil. And that people that worked for him supported his evil. Much like what we decided, that essentially, the SS, we were just following orders. No, Hitler was evil and you carried out his evil. That's the comparison that is very often being made. And I'm going, no, he was kind of a narcissistic dickhead. And I understand why it is people react badly to him. I get this. So that being the case, is that now we are in a position where, because that is the way that he and those who voted for him and interpreted or supported him and worked for him are seen as just evil people, without any real epistemological way of disseminating that, rather than just wrong, or rather than I just disagree. Then we have a dangerous situation, because fighting evil is what as you pointed out earlier, it's that care and harm, loyalty, and go ahead and read the other ones on your sheet there.
So the next one, you're kind of segueing into that, was the
Yeah.
fairness. So we have now the other one we have on one side, we have fairness and cheating, and this, not to go on too far, but how this served early man is that people that ended up getting together and working with others had a much better chance of success.
That's right.
And if you, let's say you had an interaction with a person and you just took, you didn't get anything back, you could only have one interaction with that person, because the next time that person would be like, no, you're not fair. You don't keep things equal. And so everybody kind of worked together to keep things kind of fair, and cheaters were punished and so forth. So everybody kind of cares about fairness, but there's two major kinds of fairness. To the left, fairness implies equality, and to the right, it means proportionality. So those two words are very important.
That's right.
Differences between the two. In the rights version, you should be rewarded based upon what you put out. In proportion to what you contribute, instead of guaranteeing some sort of equal outcome. And the left tends to look at it a little bit more as from the perspective of the people that are more on the bottom that are being taken advantage of by the top. And that's kind of how that whole thing works out, and the way that it's now being used as a culture war issue. And once you read these things, they're easy to spot. They're fucking everywhere. And by the way, Trump hits every single one of these repetitively, constantly, and not by accident.
No, he does it on purpose.
Every single one of these things. So for the left, it's Occupy Wall Street, right? That's the fairness cheating. These people are taking advantage of us. They're ripping us off. They're not paying their fair share of taxes. the corporations that are destroying things. That's always been, which is funny because now the leadership of the left though is now partnering with those corporations, but the people haven't caught on to that yet.
Yep.
And for instance, taxing the rich to care for the poor. These are like that. Taxing the rich to care for the poor is both foundations that the liberals care about. It's the Care Foundation and it's the Fairness Cheating Foundation, which these are the only two foundations that really turn to liberals. The other three, which we'll talk about, are pretty much only on the right. But on the right, the Tea Party is the other side of that, which is kind of more or less gone away now. But they see the Democrats as socialists taking money away from hardworking Americans and giving them to say for welfare. And the way that they see these welfare people are just sitting on the couches, smoking their go to work. I'm not saying any of this is true. This is the way the elephant or your emotional, the way that they're used. And another one would be like giving away free healthcare to illegal immigrants. So they see those things as not being fair. So in the Fairness Cheating Foundation, you definitely see on both sides of the spectrum, only completely different thoughts.
Well, and this is also why I've said very many times, you've heard me say it, and it's something I believe in wholeheartedly, and that is that in order to create positive change, we don't necessarily have to agree on what is fair and what isn't. We have to understand each other instead. Once we understand each other, change is possible. As long as I go, no, you're wrong. Giving free healthcare to illegal aliens is unfair for these reasons, then we can't find common ground, and common ground comes from understanding. From there, we can agree on a balanced approach that serves largely what it is that both groups of people are there to discuss. So that being the case, you and Haidt are right. Once you are aware of these things, I see them every day when I look around. I go, and it's very easy also to understand how to approach somebody when you go, okay, this is their elephant's taking them here. These are the two moral foundations that they're going to stand on the most. So let's see if we can find a way to have them understand me and I understand them. And then from there, this is like you said earlier, what Haidt had proposed was something that was previously known, but it kind of gave it greater depth when we got these six moral foundations to attach to it. And that is that innately we are tribal. But at the same time, through the course of evolutionary psychology, we did come to it's going to be easier for all of us. I think in the book, he said for all of us to get out of Africa and get into Asia and Europe, into the colder climates, if we can also find a way to cooperate to survive. Otherwise, we never would have made it out of Africa in that case.
Perfect segue. The next one is the Loyalty versus Betrayal Foundation.
Ah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then that's exactly what you're talking about right now, is this is the tribal instinct. So in 1954, a guy named Mustafar Sharif, I believe is Mustafar, did a very interesting experiment in Oklahoma. He managed to get, I think it was 11 kids. He got 22 kids, and he convinced their parents to let him have them, and he took them out to this camp for 3 weeks. And he told each group that they were alone, so they didn't know about each other. He took the first group out and set them up first. And so they had the area for 2 weeks. They managed to keep them away from each other, and immediately they started to set up sort of these tribal type of behaviors. They found a pool, and they made some changes to it. They said, this is our pool, this is our area, this little walkway. They started to have songs. They even came up with like a motto. They came up with a name. They called themselves the Rattlers, and we don't fear anything, I think it was. And they were fully unaware that they were, another group. And the other group that did the same thing, and they watched, and they both did the same thing. So then he brought one group close enough that they could hear the other group playing on a baseball field. And that's when the other group said, holy shit, we're not alone out here. Somebody's on our baseball field. And they immediately wanted to challenge him to a game of baseball. And he said from that point on, once they realized that there was two groups now, they started making flags. They started having their own songs. They became super organized in the way they were going to compete and destroy the other team. They immediately went into this, and they had to keep them. They would have gone to blows. They were coming up with weapons. They were going to fight each other over this, and the counselors.
Lord of the Flies.
So all of that kind of explains the fact that we are really prone to tribalism, which I don't think you need to convince anybody of that. I mean, that's just, you look around and you do that. And so the way this loyalty betrayal thing works, though, is within the tribe, traitors are actually, if you look back at, say, in the Quran, it never tells them that this Muslim who has lost his faith is much worse. Um, that one needs to be put to death. Find very important to the Republicans that within our own being true to our tribe, the United States of America, that so this is where all that patriotism comes from. This is where all that flag waving comes from. Tends to be very, very important to the right. This really triggers them. The left don't get that at all.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. So for instance, when you talk about globalism to the right, that freaks them out. The left is like, what's the problem? It's not a big deal. We all live in this world together, right? I mean, they don't see that as bad at all. The burning of flags is the big one that triggers the right. And
one of my favorites to throw at the right when they're being dominating, about those kinds of issues.
And it's because they believe in this that moral foundation of you need to be loyal. And so I think one of the biggest recent events that really is interesting to the two of these things is the kneeling for the American anthem. When this happened, so it started as the Care Harm Foundation of African Americans being mistreated by the police in the violence that we'd all see on videos, triggered someone to make a statement. And he made that statement by kneeling during the national. Well, at first, actually, I think he sat down, and then he was told that it would be more appropriate to kneel because that's what they do on a fallen hero. So that's what he was told to do. So he did this, and I think that it started to gather a lot of movement on the left. There's a lot of action. There was a lot of belief in this. And now, whether this happened organically or whether it came from the right said, well, we can't have that. And so they created this loyalty to table thing where they made it about you're disrespecting the flag, you're disrespecting the patriots. And so now you have the right is arguing this point and the left is arguing this point, and they're not even.
No one's talking to each other. And they're not talking to each other. They're talking at each other. Here's a good example. Here's another example. Let me follow up with another one that I think we can all agree on. And that is to say Black Lives Matter and then have people go, all lives matter. Why can't you just say you're right? All Black Lives Matter. They certainly do. That's it. Why? Why is it?
It really is.
Why is it necessary? Well, I know that some of the epistemological arguments for like the critical theory, the postmodernist, or the cultural Marxist theory would say that it is because in some way white people, which some people actually say that all lives matter who aren't white, but white people are saying that because it is some sort of threat to whatever internalized power that they feel like they have, which I can take that to task all day. But the point being is that why can't you just acknowledge it and say, yes, you're right, Black Lives Matter. That's it.
Which moral foundations do you think are at work in this thing?
Well, that would actually, that is actually a disloyalty, I would say myself. It would also be fairness.
Who are protecting?
Fairness. This would be the other. This would be the other thing that I would say that would probably cross lines. It would work on both sides, because the right clearly, eschews all 5 or 6 now of these different moral foundations, and the left 3. But the rights are more nuanced. So the right would see it as well, wait a minute. How come it is that we're giving something up when it's pretty clear that we all are in the same boat, which is kind of a flip, that's really interesting. So to me, this is more based on psychology so much than the moral foundations idea. This is a good question for me, actually.
Well, so in the next one is the authority versus subversion foundation.
Okay. Yeah, go.
I think this one, because the police end up being the authority in this type of situation, which is one of the things that we also, what's always kind of interesting to me is that typically you have on the right, you have this valid opinion that I don't like to be told what to do, and I certainly don't like government overreach, but I love the cops. And the cops are basically a huge government program that their job is to tell people what to do based upon laws that politicians passed. And so you have this sort of weird dichotomy going on. They agree with them.
Let me ask you this then, okay? Because I'm not sure which side some of these you fall on anymore, because you've had a journey towards the center, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to cut you off on your point, but I want to because I think I'll get some clarity here, and that would be you're speaking in generalizations. the right loves the cops. Well, what part of the right loves the cops, and what do you mean by loving the cops? See, to me, these things are so nuanced that I'd need a clarification before I could even agree with that argument, that premise,
All right.
anyway.
So that's very fair, and I will say that without a doubt, this is just based upon what I see on the internet.
Well,
It's the arguments.
so
It's
it's
the arguments that I hear, and the things that people post from the right tend to like. A lot of my friends say Blue Lives Matter. Are you going to be confident to say that? So I feel like there's a lot of support to police in this argument where that's what comes up against it. So that's where I'm coming from on that.
okay. Fair enough. So it's not really a position you're taking; it's just an observation.
No,
Got
no,
it.
I'm totally in the opposite. Yeah, I have. You have screwed me up so much that I can't.
Is that seriously, man? It is a thing to not be able to have an opinion without going. Now, wait a minute.
I can't because
What are all the nuances of that opinion? I have to. There's so many nuances of an opinion.
Right.
So anyway, we do have to wrap it up.
Okay.
My kid's turning 18 tomorrow. We got about 10 minutes, so let's continue reading through your notes. And I would love to pick this up again with you. Actually,
Well, we can. We'll finish. We'll get through all five. The authority subversion one is it's very nuanced, and it really has to do with hierarchies and that you have to have a certain amount of respect, and it's complicated because it's respect up and it's respect down, and all that. And the liberals definitely don't see themselves as being part of that. They definitely prefer to see themselves as being sort of rebellions. And the last one is really complicated and variable in today's world, and that's the sanctity versus degradation foundation. This one, the triggers for this one that you find that are very common in today's world is Merry Christmas, the war on Christmas. Christmas is sacred. So you have these things that are sacred. You have abortion, life is sacred. That's triggers. Prayers in school, supporting Israel. Biomedical issues are a big one that this falls under. That somehow playing around with stem cells is just I don't know why it's wrong. They'll say, but it's just
playing God is the kind of argument that I've heard, and I'm going. Which to me, again, it opens up a philosophical can of worms rather than it being a simple. It's like, well, okay, did God not endow man with the ability to do this? So why would he do such a thing, especially in the service of making mankind better? See, these are
right. That's
right.
I think to me, what I'm trying to get at least with all this, I kind of wrap it up, and then we can definitely open it up, is that being that I'm a recovering liberal.
I love it.
My emotions are always going to be liberal. It's always, I'm never going to not immediately respond to things in the way a liberal would. Now I just go, oh, okay, there you are. And let me talk to you about this and look at it. And so,
Aristotelian.
Yeah.
That's what Aristotle did, yeah.
Oh, fascinating. I'm in good company. And I look at all five of these and I always try to understand, well, what's really going on here and what is the truth to it. And then when I talk to other people, I tend to try to figure out exactly where it is that they're coming from and then find common ground with them and then try to help them see that there's another side that's also human and that they're not evil. I think that's, if anything, that's what I've been trying to do.
And that is what I guess that, I think you just said it. You just said it better than I ever have. And that's kind of what I'm saying too, is that when to my earlier point about how people will see a group as evil rather than just different or wrong, or I disagree, which is what we're all perfectly capable of doing. And you had mentioned nationalist earlier. Nationalism has the definition has changed, as happens very often. It's usually they're changed sometimes due to just purely organic social causes. Will change those words.
Just a second, and then you can go on. Real quick. One of the things that I was thinking about the other day is that we have examples of each side doing really bad things that we kind of go to, like Nazis.
This is what we call a fundamental attribution error.
Right. Yeah. So that's go ahead.
So, and that's what I'm talking about. In that, what I was saying earlier about Dr. King and the way he presented things, the way that we can either present them as, hey, we all have this common human thing that we're trying to accomplish, and as human beings, we're innately going to find ways that we don't understand each other and that we disagree with one another. But as humans that need to actually coexist, survive, thrive, make things better, we have to learn to understand that our opinions are human. It's part of our humanity. So to that point, I was saying earlier, okay, blacklists need to be made because Trump and all that supported him and worked for him were evil. They're not evil. They just had a different idea. You know, I didn't see a great deal of evil in it myself. We haven't seen a great deal of evil in a long time. You know what I mean? So you just said that, I think that was the key. I'm going to actually see if I can reframe my whole communication efforts on this unity idea that I'm working on by just taking what you just said about how these differences are human differences. You know, they are about, they are natural differences as we have as human beings. I think that's even what Haidt is kind of trying to say with moral foundations theory, is that these moral foundations are part of our humanity. So in any case, again, I'm doing a bad job of getting through it because I tend to riff live rather than riffing behind the curtain first. You know, I'll go out and I'll start noodling and go, oh shit, did I forget we were playing a song? So you'll have to forgive me when I do that. In any case, it's really heartening to hear that it is a discipline to stop and think because we are driven to reaction. That's human too. So what Aristotle was saying is that in order to change that, we have to practice it. We got to practice that. Okay, there you are. Like you just said, there's my elephant. Okay, here's my emotional reaction. Now, what do I think? That takes effort. So, in any case,
it takes a little bit of, God, I don't want to sound arrogant, but it does take a little bit of courage. Because
it takes a lot of courage.
When you lose your religion, it's like letting go of the ropes. You know, it's if you were walking the tightrope, but you had to hold on to something like this, it's like letting go because, oh fuck, and it was very, very unsettling for a long time. So I don't.
Which is why I didn't hear from you for weeks.
Yeah, I don't think there's. I don't think there's a lot of people that are up for it, and I think that right now, if you look at our political world right now, if you look at the internet and everything, I think that everybody's elephants are being fed like a bunch of children's sugar. They have figured it out. CNN has figured it out.
Of course, I've been saying this on this channel for a long time.
Right. The politicians have way more than Trump's figured it out.
He knows it better than anybody I've seen in a long time.
Really does. If once you understand exactly what's going on, then you go watch the way he speaks. You're like, oh, now I know why they love him, because it's hard to understand until you realize he hits every trigger point. And so we are being fed this like fast food feeds us the things that we crave. We have this natural drive for sugar and fat because at one time it served us really fucking well because we didn't have an unlimited supply of food.
It kept us alive.
For us to have an unlimited supply of food. Now we have this unlimited supply of food, and oh my God, we're fat.
And it's going to kill us instead. It's the other way around.
This is the same. This is like emotional sugar and fat that the media and that social media is now feeding us, and we're running wild with it. And you see more and more that the other side is evil and inhuman, and you start seeing levels of disgust. Emotion. Disgust is just about as bad as it can get, and I'll have nothing to do with you at all if I'm disgusted with you. So.
Well, and disgust is actually something that Haidt did a lot of work on disgust. Believe it or not.
Foundation. We didn't have time to get into it, but that's all based on the disgust that eventually came out of that because it wanted, you need to stay away from dead bodies and sickness and water that's not healthy for you. So that's where the disgust thing first started.
Well, let us. I mean, honestly, I really enjoyed the conversation. I think that you took so much from that book. I recommended it to Dustin as well, who is actually in the middle of it. I think it would be really cool to get the three of us together and discuss this too, because you have offered. I have simply seen it as the explanation of why there are these two warring factions. But I've also applied it to, as you said, CNN's got it figured out. The politicians pay a lot of money for experts that have figured this kind of stuff out to drive us. So the practical applications of this and how we can recognize them should be another conversation that we have based on what we just talked about tonight. Does that sound like a good idea? Lots of respect for your journey, man. I appreciate you sharing it here. I appreciate you being a part of what it is we do. I must also say the other day, I had posted something where you felt like me bringing Trump into it was unnecessary for me to make the point. So in my usual fashion, I said, great, I'm wide open to understand how to do it better. What I thought was really interesting is I asked Martin to reframe my statement in a way that liberal ears might actually not be triggered. And he did, and then goes, God damn it, you're right. It's really hard not to bring Trump into this.
What I just said was boring as hell.
Yeah, you also used literally twice the number of words that I did to say it without using the word Trump.
After I did that, I'm like, what was my point? I think I just wanted to fucking argue. I love the debate. I just want to kind of fire you up and get you in the ring because I know that even if I get beat up, I come out stronger every time I bow. That's why I like, being on this. When I'm on this site, real quickly, is I recognize that I have a different kind of intelligence. Like I have a folk intelligence that I have that's more experience, it's more life. It's not I learned at school. Like I'm purely the pentatonic scale, played with a lot of feeling. I don't understand any of that kind of stuff. And I get here and I read these people, and I'm just like fucking super impressed by the level of intelligence and their communication skill. And so I like to mix it up and throw it in there because I
understand
people that are dumber than you. Yeah.
Actually, Dustin, when I was telling him the other night that we were going to have you on, he was like, oh, that's going to be cool. I can't wait to see that. People, I think you bring just as good as any of us do. And I got to tell you, I mean, I went to school in my 20s, but I went to trade school. I became a network engineer. I did study computer science and network communication signal theory, that kind of stuff. But I went back to school in my late 30s to study psychology and sociology. And then my business boomed, so I had to leave school. I went back to school 6 years ago in order to pick up where I left off. So life experience came first. And now, and I can say that for thinking...
Sorry, yeah.
No, not at all. I'm not taking it that way. What I'm saying is that I recommend that people that reach our age and experience go back to school because I think we could potentially get more out of it. It provides us with like, oh, I've thought this for a long time. Here's how it all fits together. It's like a group of Legos. And we're also not so easily led as to go, wow, the professor rocks, man. He's a rock star. He's right. And then go on some communistic expedition somewhere based on what some teacher told us. You know what I mean?
Electrolytes, man.
Because it's got electrolytes.
Electrolytes.
So anyway, thanks again, man. I really appreciate the conversation, Martin.
We hope we didn't bore the hell out of everybody because I could keep doing this for a while. That was fun. Thank you.
Honestly, if it weren't for, my kid's turning 18, man, it's a big deal. He's actually literally moving out tomorrow on his 18th birthday. So it's dinner time. I'm going to go spend some time with my kid. But I really appreciate you, David, Dustin, Will, Mike, everybody that chimed in and tuned in. It looks like we were a little light tonight. I'm wondering if there was football. Maybe. Yeah, it's you. Yeah, Martin's boring. Anyway, thanks again, everybody. Also, again, if I got something wrong, if we mischaracterized something, if I left something out, please let us know. I'm always about learning something better learning something in the light of better information than standing on something stupid and incorrect. So I really appreciate y'all. Have a good night.